"Don't come any closer," Maeve whispered into the dark, her voice barely holding together. "I'm warning you." He didn't answer. He just crouched down in the snow beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her neck, checking her pulse like she was a patient and not a woman who'd just told him to back off. His hands were warm. That was the thing that caught her. In all that cold, his hands were impossibly warm. She'd been running for 3 hours. She didn't know that's what it was at first. The truck had broken down on the highway outside Cochrane, and she'd thought, fine, I'll walk to the next exit. People did it all the time in Ontario. Except it wasn't Ontario anymore. It was northern Quebec in February, and the temperature had dropped to -28 before she'd even made it a kilometer. Her phone had died somewhere around the first kilometer marker. She hadn't told anyone where she was going because she'd been trying to disappear. That's the thing about running away from your life. You do it quietly, so no one can drag you back. But Maeve Laurier had made the mistake of running toward nowhere in particular, and the storm that followed her down the 117 didn't care about her plans. She'd found the logging road by accident, following what she thought were lights. Turned out to be ice reflecting off the moon. She'd walked that road for 40 minutes before her legs stopped working properly, not in the dramatic way you see in movies, but in the slow, stupid way where your brain sends the signal and your body just doesn't comply. She'd sat down against a tree to rest for a moment. Just a moment. She didn't hear him coming. 1 second she was alone in the dark with the sound of wind in the spruce trees, and the next there was a flashlight beam sweeping across her face. "Don't touch me," she said again, but it came out slurred this time, and she hated herself for it. "I'm not going to hurt you." He said it flat, without reassurance, like he was stating a weather fact. "But your lips are blue, and you've got about another 20 minutes before your core temp drops below recoverable. So you can either let me help you, or I can leave you here and let the bush decide." She looked up at him. He was big in the way that working men got big. Not a gym, just years of hauling and cutting and carrying. He had a beard that hadn't been trimmed in a while, and dark eyes that caught the flashlight in a way she didn't expect. He was wearing a canvas jacket, no parka, like the cold wasn't something he negotiated with. "Who are you?" she managed. "Rourke," he said. Just the one word. Then he held out his hand. "Can you stand?" She couldn't. Not fully. He had to get an arm under her, and she was too cold and too far gone to protest the way she would have under any other circumstances. He smelled like wood smoke and pine resin and something else she couldn't name. Clean. The way outside smells clean, without any effort at it. He half carried her down the logging road to a cabin she hadn't seen because it sat back from the road, behind a windbreak of cedars, dark except for the glow of embers through a window. He pushed through the door with his shoulder, it wasn't locked, and got her inside and onto a wooden bench near the wood stove before she could protest any of it. The inside of the cabin was small and functional, and entirely without anything unnecessary. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves with canned goods and tools and maps, a rifle on the wall, which she clocked immediately. No curtains, no decoration, the kind of space where a man lived alone and hadn't thought to make it anything other than what it was. He got the fire built up and put a pot of water on without speaking. She sat there with her hands shaking and watched him, and tried to figure out whether she was in more danger than she'd been outside. And the answer she kept coming back to was, probably not. "There's a blanket on the bed," he said, not looking at her. "You need to get out of those wet things." "I'm fine." He turned and looked at her then. The fire was up enough that she could see his face clearly for the first time, and something in his expression wasn't unkind. It was the look of someone who had been through enough to know when someone else was lying to themselves. "Your jacket's soaked through," he said. "Wet fabric against skin in this temperature is what kills people. Not the cold itself, the wet." She knew he was right. She'd grown up in the North. She knew the rules. But knowing the rules and following them when a stranger was standing in front of you were 2 different things. And old fear didn't care about logic. "Turn around," she said. He did. No hesitation, no comment. He just turned to the wall and stood there with his back to her. And that small, immediate compliance loosened something in her chest that had been knotted since she'd left Gatineau 4 days ago. She peeled out of the wet jacket and the sweater beneath it and wrapped the wool blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like cedar. "Okay," she said. He turned back and handed her a mug of something hot. Not tea, just boiled water with a spoonful of honey stirred in, and sat down at the table a full meter away from her, which she noticed. They didn't speak for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the storm had gotten louder, the wind working its way through every gap it could find. "You broke down on the highway?" he said eventually. "Truck died. Where were you headed?" She looked at the mug in her hands. "I don't know yet." He accepted that with a small nod, like it was a perfectly reasonable answer. Maybe, she thought, to someone living alone in the northern bush it was. She didn't ask him why he was out there at midnight in February without a parka. She didn't ask why someone lived in a place this remote, this deliberately hard to find. She'd been around enough quiet men to know that the asking too early was what got you lied to. You had to wait until they decided to tell you. What she didn't expect was for it to be her information that came out first. It happened the way those things always do, slowly and then all at once. She'd been warming up for maybe an hour, the color coming back into her fingers, and she was starting to feel something like herself again, which meant she was starting to feel afraid again, which meant she made the mistake of letting her guard down far enough to say, "I need to get to Sept Isles by the end of the week." He looked at her over the table. "That's 8 hours east of here, in good weather." "I know." "Why Sept Isles?" She didn't answer right away. But something about the straightforward way he asked it, no subtext, no manipulation, just a direct question, made her say, "There's someone there who has something that belongs to my father, your father. He died 8 months ago." She said it cleanly. Because she'd practiced saying it without the fall in her voice. The men he worked for said the death was accidental. Equipment failure, they called it. But I found his work notes, the ones he kept at home, not the ones he submitted, and what he wrote didn't match what they told the investigation. Rourke was quiet for a moment. What did he work on? He was an inspector, water management infrastructure. She set the mug down. There's a contract up for renewal in the Sept Isles region. Big money. His notes suggested that someone had been falsifying safety assessments to get the contract renewed, and that he'd been about to file a formal report. And then he died. The wind hit the cabin hard enough to make the door rattle. Rourke looked at the door and then back at her. "How many people know you have these notes?" The question hit her differently than she expected. Not skeptical, not patronizing, tactical, like he was already solving a problem. "At least 2, she said. "Maybe more. My father's former supervisor, a man named Crevier, and his business partner." She paused. "Someone broke into my apartment in Gatineau 10 days ago. They went through his study. I'd already moved the notes, but—" She stopped. "I didn't call the police because I didn't know who to trust." "Smart," he said, and she couldn't tell if he meant it or not. "I've been driving since Thursday," she said. "I was going to take the ferry from Havre-Saint-Pierre to the island. There's a source I was supposed to meet. Someone who worked in the same department as my father. He reached out to me after the funeral. Said he had records that would corroborate everything said," Rourke repeated. "He stopped returning my messages 2 weeks ago." Rourke stood up then and went to the window, not the one facing the road, but the smaller one on the north side of the cabin, and stood there looking out at nothing she could see from where she sat. His jaw was working slightly, the way men's jaws did when they were thinking through something they hadn't decided to say yet. She watched him. There was something careful about the way he held himself. Careful, but not nervous. The way you moved when you'd spent a long time being very aware of your surroundings. She'd seen it in her father sometimes, after a particularly difficult inspection. The weight of knowing something that other people were counting on you not to know. "What's your name?" he asked, still looking at the window. "Maeve, Maeve." He said it once, like he was checking its weight. "How did you end up on the logging road at midnight?" "I pulled off the highway when the truck started losing power. I thought there might be a house." She paused. There wasn't. He turned from the window. "You can sleep here tonight." Storm's not letting up until morning, and there's no signal on that road until you're back on the 117. He looked at her steadily. "I'll take the floor." You don't have to. I know, he said, which was somehow the most disarming thing he could have said. She slept, which surprised her. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Not since the break-in. Not since she'd started carrying her father's notes in a waterproof pouch inside her coat, because she didn't trust anywhere else to keep them. But the warmth of the wood stove, and the howling containment of the storm, and some quality of the silence that Rourke occupied, did something to her nervous system that she couldn't entirely explain. She slept hard and woke to gray light and the smell of coffee. He was at the table with a topographical map spread out and a mug in front of him. He looked up when she sat up. Storm cleared around 4, he said. Roads might be passable by midday. She swung her legs off the bed. Her clothes had dried over the back of the chair. He'd hung them there sometime in the night without her asking. She looked at him. You're not going to ask me more questions? I've got a few, he said. But not until you've had coffee. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She had coffee. She ate some of the canned beans he heated up on the stove without ceremony or apology. They sat across from each other at the table, and outside the cedars were heavy with snow, and the world was very white and very quiet. Crevier, Rourke said finally. Benoit Crevier? She went still. You know him. I know of him. He turned the mug in his hands. I used to work for the federal government, different department. But Crevier's name came up in something I was involved with about 4 years ago, a tender process that had irregularities. It didn't go anywhere. It rarely does with men like that. He paused. But the pattern you're describing, the assessments, the contract, the inspector who got too close, that's not the first time, I'd bet on it. The hair on her arms went up. Who are you really? Rourke Deschênes, he said. I was an investigative auditor with Public Services until I left in 2019. I left because I'd spent 3 years watching the reports I wrote disappear before they reached anyone with the authority to act on them. He looked at his mug. I came up here to stop being angry about it. And are you? Not angry? He looked at her. I was until last night. She felt the shift of it, not a romantic shift, but something older and more serious. The shift of two people recognizing that they are standing inside the same problem. The notes, he said. Can I see them? She hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then she reached into her coat, which was hanging over the chair beside her, and pulled out the waterproof pouch. He read carefully, without rushing it, without commenting as he went. She watched his face and saw the moment. She could pinpoint it exactly, the second page, halfway down, when something in his expression changed. A tightening around the eyes, a long exhale through the nose. This references a compliance sign-off dated March of last year, he said. I know the site this refers to. I reviewed the original assessment on that infrastructure in 2018. He set the pages down and looked at her. The numbers your father wrote here are not the numbers that were on the report I reviewed. The room was very quiet, which means, Maeve said carefully, that someone altered the report between your review and submission. Yes, and my father found out, yes. She breathed in, breathed out. So what do we do? He was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then he said, I know someone. Retired now, but she spent 30 years with the Auditor General's office, and she still has contacts that don't care what Crevier's budget looks like. If your source in Septiles has gone quiet, we need a different avenue. He paused. And you shouldn't drive that road alone. I know you don't need me, he said, and there was no condescension in it, at all. But Crevier has resources, and you have a 4-year-old truck and a waterproof pouch. Those are not equivalent. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a chunk of snow fell off a cedar branch and disappeared. I leave when the road's clear, she said. I know, he said. I'll get my bag. They drove east on the 117 with the truck's heater working intermittently and the map spread on the seat between them. Her phone navigation was back, but she didn't entirely trust it, and neither did he, which was another thing they had in common. He knew the roads north of the St. Lawrence the way people knew things they'd lived, not studied. He told her which exits were actually plowed and which were wishful thinking on the map. He didn't talk much otherwise, and she'd stopped filling silences out of politeness sometime in her mid-20s, so they were both fine with that. They were 40 minutes outside of Baie-Comeau when her phone rang. Unknown number. She glanced at it. Take it on speaker, Rourke said. Not a command, just practical. She did. Miss Laurier. The voice was male, older, with the flat administrative cadence of someone who had spent a career in offices. My name is not important. What's important is that you turn around. She kept her eyes on the road. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. Who gave you this number? The same person who gave us your apartment address in Gatineau, the voice said. We're not unreasonable people. Your father made a difficult situation complicated. We'd prefer not to do that again. The line went dead. Maeve drove another 200 meters before she said anything. That was a threat. Yes, Rourke said. They know where I'm going. They know the destination. They don't know the road we're taking. He looked at the map. There's a turn coming up in about 4 kilometers. Take it. Where does it go? A town called Pointe-aux-Noirs. I know someone there. He paused. Her name is Françoise. She was the one who originally flagged Crevier's file 4 years ago. She's the reason the inquiry got as far as it did before it was buried. He looked straight ahead. She's been waiting for something like this. Maeve took the turn. Françoise Cadio lived in a house at the end of a road that hadn't been on any map Maeve had seen, in a town small enough that the post office was also, the gas station was also the hardware store. She was 72 years old, with white hair cut practically short, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people tried to make her feel like she didn't belong, and had stopped letting them. She opened the door before they knocked. She looked at Maeve, then at Rourke, then back at Maeve. You have Bernard's eyes, she said. Maeve's throat closed. You knew my father. He called me, Françoise said. 7 weeks before he died. He said he'd found something and he needed to know if what he had was enough. She stepped back from the door. Come in. It's cold. Inside, over tea that Françoise poured without asking what anyone wanted, Maeve learned things about her father she hadn't known. That he had tried twice to route his findings through official channels and been redirected both times. That the compliance officer who'd signed off on the falsified assessment, a man named Aubert, based in Trois-Rivières, had been found dead 14 months ago in what was ruled a cardiac event. That Françoise had a file, a real file, not notes in a notebook, but documented correspondence, time-stamped of. I've been sitting on this because I needed corroboration, Françoise said. She looked at the waterproof pouch that Maeve had placed on the table. Is that what I think it is? My father's field notes. Françoise reached out and rested her hand on the pouch for a moment without opening it. It was a strange gesture, reverential almost, like she was acknowledging something. Together, she said, this is enough. Enough for what? Maeve asked. For the journalist I've been talking to at Le Devoir. For the contact I still have at the commissioner's office who hasn't been bought. Françoise looked at her steadily. And enough to make it very unwise for Crevier to do anything to either of you, because the moment anything happens to you, everything goes public, automatically. Maeve sat with that for a moment. My source in Septiles, she said. The one who stopped responding, Léon Métivier, Françoise said. He's fine. He's been staying off the grid since November on my advice. I'll reach out to him. She paused. He'll be relieved to know you made it. The room was warm. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and went quiet. Maeve looked down at her hands. Steady now, both of them, for the first time in weeks. She thought about her father. Bernard Laurier, who had spent 31 years doing careful, unglamorous, necessary work, and who had died because he was too honest to stop doing it. She thought about the notebook she'd found, tucked behind a loose panel in his study. The handwriting that was so like his. Economical, exact, every number double-checked. She thought about how he used to say that the job of an inspector was to make sure that the people who trusted the system were not wrong to trust it. She thought he would have liked Rourke, who said what he meant and didn't perform anything. Who had held a door open and turned his back and handed her a mug of hot water with honey in it and asked nothing in return except that she let herself not die in the snow. She thought he would have liked Françoise, who had kept a file for 4 years in a house at the end of a road that wasn't on any map, because she believed that the truth was the kind of thing worth waiting for. What happens now? Maeve asked. Françoise set down her cup. Now we make some phone calls, she said. And tomorrow you and I sit down and we go through every page of what you have, and I'll tell you what I know, and we build something that doesn't fall apart. Rourke stood up and went to the window. He had a way of going to windows when he was thinking she'd already noticed, and looked out at the gray afternoon. Crevier's going to know you made contact, he said. He has people watching. He's known for 4 years that I exist, Francoise said. It hasn't killed me yet. She said it without bravado. Just fact. Maeve looked at the table, above, at the waterproof pouch that had been inside her coat for 10 days, pressed against her ribs while she slept in rest stops and budget motels, and once in the back seat of her truck in a parking lot in Joliet, because she'd been too tired to drive further and too afraid to stop somewhere she might be found. She'd carried it like she was carrying her father, like if she kept it safe, she was keeping something of him safe. She picked it up and opened it and laid the pages out on Francoise's table. Let's start, she said. Dove. They worked until it was dark outside, and then Francoise made soup from whatever she had. Potatoes, lentils, a can of tomatoes, and they ate it at the table with the documents pushed to one side. Rourke washed the bowls without being asked. Structure of Francoise argued with someone on the phone for 22 minutes in a voice that suggested the argument was going exactly the way she intended. Maeve sat on the front step in the cold for a few minutes, looking at the stars coming out over the spruce trees, which were the same stars she'd stared at from her father's back deck when she was small. Dove, when he used to take her outside on clear nights and name the constellations in both French and English, because he said every star deserved at least 2 names. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying already months ago, in the particular private way of people who don't like to be witnessed in it. She just looked at the sky and thought, I found the right road. Inside, Francoise was getting off the phone. Le Devoir wants to speak to you directly, she called. They can do it tomorrow morning if you're willing. Maeve came back inside and let the door close behind her. I'm willing, she said. Above. In Trois-Rivières, 2 days later, a man named Crevier received a registered letter from a law office he didn't recognize, with a return address in Ottawa. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set it down on his desk and sat very still for a long time. He had been very careful. He had been careful for a long time. He had believed that careful was the same as safe. He was finding out that it wasn't. Maeve Laurier didn't know any of that yet. Above. She was sitting in a coffee shop in Baie-Comeau with a paper cup of tea going cold beside her laptop, reading the draft article that the journalist from Le Devoir had sent for her review. Rourke was across the table, reviewing his own copy, making small pencil marks in the margin. She got to the paragraph about her father, his name, his role, the years of service, the 8 months since his death, and she had to stop for a moment. Rourke looked up. He didn't say anything. He just waited, the way she was starting to understand that he waited for everything, with patience and without pressure, like time was a thing he'd made his peace with. She exhaled. She nodded. It's good, she said. It's right. He went back to his page outside the St. of. Lawrence was frozen solid at the edges and open and dark in the middle, enormous and indifferent, and exactly itself, the way it had been before any of this and would be long after. Maeve watched it through the coffee shop window for a moment. Then she went back to the article. Dove. She had 2 more pages to review, and then she had a phone call to make to Léon Métivier in Sept-Îles, who had been waiting in quiet and in hope, and she didn't want to make him wait any longer. Her father had spent his whole life making sure the water was safe. The least she could do was make sure the record was straight.